Hello everyone. I've made several videos before, talking about ragas or scales of film songs. In this video, I'm going to focus at least equally on what doesn't make a song fit a particular raga, right? Of course, this is also something that I have talked about in my past videos in fragments, but so I wanted to make a video bringing together or consolidating what to me are some key factors that we should be wary of when we attribute ragas to non-Carnatic pieces or songs, right? While I of course certainly enjoy the process of analyzing film songs, associating classical ragas to film songs when it's not warranted is kind of as much of a pet peeve of mine. So let me start with an oft repeated point. There are broadly two kinds of ragas, right? Scalar or scale based and the non-scalar ragas. So scalar ragas are they are largely defined by the scale, that is the arohanam, avarohanam, or the ascent and descent of notes, which are usually linear or monotonically increasing and monotonically decreasing. And B, these scalar ragas are not as heavy in gamakas, right? They're not very gamaka laden. So examples are Hamsadhwani, Mohanam, Hamsanadam, Shuddha Saveri, and so on. Of course, some of these ragas, great composers in the Carnatic tradition have infused a lot of life into these ragas in the form of gamakas through their compositions, right? If you look at some, traditional Carnatic compositions in these ragas, you're going to have a lot of gamakam. But still, my point is that the difference or the distance between the bare bones scale of these ragas and the raga, the full raga in all its splendor, is not that much. So, for example, let's take Mohanam, right? Sariga pada sa sada pagari sa. The difference between that and Sariga pada sa sada pagari sa. It's not like it's a world of a difference. There is some family resemblance, right, between the first, what I sang first and what I sang next, right? So, for this reason, I think it's almost always okay to straightforwardly associate film songs to these kinds of ragas. So, for instance, Vellai Pookal from Kannathil Muttamittal, I think it's fairly okay to say that it's based on Hamsadhwani, right? Even though the song is largely filled with plain notes without a lot of gamakas, the Hamsadhwani scale, Sariga pani sa sa ni pa ga ri sa, is not worlds apart from Sariga pani sa sa ni pa ga ri sa, right? To take an even more, maybe an extreme example, the song Vellarika Pinju Vellarika, right? I think it's from the film Kadal Kottai. Vellarika Pinju Vellarika Enna Paakama Porale Chandarika. So, of course, it's a very folkish, fun kind of Mohanam, but I think it's still okay to call it Mohanam. It's not very different. Now, when it comes to non-scalar ragas, there's a whole range. So, we can talk about relative non-scalarity, if that's a word. Let's start with the simple case of ragas that have some kind of a zigzag pattern, right? It's the simplest case of non-scalar ragas. In fact, strictly speaking, I don't know if they are non-scalar. Some of them, you could argue that it is based on the scale. It's just that the scale is not linear. It's sort of zigzag, or the term we use in Carnatic for such ragas is Vakra, right? They are Vakra ragas. If we think of the space between scalar ragas and non-scalar ragas as a spectrum, right, as a continuous spectrum, these would be more towards the scalar side. Common examples are Nalinakanthi and Kadanakuthoohalam, right? So, Nalinakanthi would be Sagari ma pani sa sani pa magari sa. It doesn't have a lot of gamakas. Now, Kadanakuthoohalam again is Sari madani ga pa sa sani da pa magari sa, right? So, both of these are, I think Nalinakanthi, I have maybe it's a personal bias, but I think Nalinakanthi is a little more nuanced than Kadanakuthoohalam. But anyway, broadly you could categorize them as ragas that are relatively more scale based, but it's not a simple ascending and a descending scale, right? So again, so with these ragas, it's usually not as contentious to associate them with film songs. So for instance, it's quite legitimate to claim that Yendan Nenjil Neengada is based on Nalinakanthi, right? Of course, you know, it's also the greatness of the composer, in this case Ilaiyaraaja. He is quite strictly stuck to the scale of the raga with very minimal deviations. But despite this relative simplicity, in this category of ragas, I've still heard some erroneous claims, such as that Kandukondain, the title track, is a mix of Nalinakanthi and Kadanakuthoohalam. And I find that quite amusing, because there is exactly one prayoga or usage from each of these ragas you'll find in the entire song, I think, if memory serves. Kandukondain Sagari Ma, that's all the Nalinakanthi you'll find there. Panidasa, immediately after that you have the Da, right, or the Daivatam, which obviously, you know, doesn't exist in Nalinakanthi. So it's quite a stretch to say that it's based on Nalinakanthi. And then in the Charanam, na 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 Rimadaniga Parisa. That one phrase is from Kadanakuthoohalam. That's it, right? So nowhere else in the song you will find, a trace of either of these ragas. Now let's take a raga such as Kedaram, right? Now this is again a Vakra scale. Samagama Panisa Sani Pamagarisa. That's the Aronam Avronam of Kedaram. But the raga goes just a little bit beyond the scale, you know, not just in terms of the gamakas, but also in terms of the swara patterns, right? So for example, that's a very typical phrase of Kedaram. Right? That doesn't appear in the Aronam Avronam, but I think it's quite a key phrase of Kedaram. And similarly, na 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 ga pa ni pa ma ga ma ga ri sa, right? So again, for this reason, with a raga like this, we should be a little more careful before claiming that a film song is in such a raga, right? So I guess that brings me to my main point, which is about the song Sundari Neeyum Sundaran Nanu. It's very often claimed that that song is in Kedaram, and I don't quite agree. Let's look at the very first line of the song. Sundari Neeyum Sasarigama, right? So, you know, forget about the song lacking the unique phrases or prayogas or usages of Kedaram, but it doesn't satisfy the even more fundamental basic criterion of just sticking to the scale, right, of the Aronam Avronam of the song, because there is no samagama, it's sarigama, right? So it really bothers me when I hear that the song is based on Kedaram, right? Of course, before I proceed, let me state my usual disclaimer, which is that I think this is one of the finest songs in Tamil film music, I guess in Indian film music, and I have very fond memories of singing it with my sister, you know, growing up, you know, back in the 90s. My claim is just that I don't think it's warranted to say that the song is in Kedaram. So, if we want to Kedarify the song, what would it be like? Sundari Neeyum Samagamapa Sundari Neeyum Sundaranyanum Cherndirundal Tiruvonam, right? Na na. As I said, that's a very typical phrase of Kedaram. கையில் கையும் வெச்சு கண்ணில் கண்ணும் வெச்சு நெஞ்சின் மந்திரம் கொண்டு சேருந்த நேரம், right? And then the charanam, na 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 കീർത്തനമാക്കി ഞാൻ പാടും right? Gama pani pa ma, that phrase, as I said, that's another typical phrase of Kedaram that appears in the raga, but that's not captured by the Aronam Avaronam. And then the next line, pasaga punjiri pa, that pasaga is like again like completely off Kedaram, right? So we could change that to pasamagama paniva punjiri palin ullam pasani paniri. Paniri is very Hamsadhwani, right? It's not Kedaram at all. Ullam kavarno, right? That would be more Kedaram. So another interesting thing about Kedaram is that the landing note, if you notice, is most predominantly the sa, right? So most of the line endings, if you look at the kritis, they end on sa. So ullam kavarno, sa, come back to sa, right? Punjiri palin ullam kavarno kannana kanne yen sundamalloni. The next line, of course, I think is fine. Right, so that's okay. If we were to fit Sundari Neeyum, Sundara Jnanam to a scale, it would be a scale that goes sa ri ga ma pa ni sa ni pa ma ga ri sa, right? Now I didn't know if there actually existed a raga like this, but I looked it up, and according to Wikipedia, I don't know, about the veracity of this claim, but according to Wikipedia, apparently this is a scale called Vilasini. So I think that if we were to attribute a raga or a scale to Sundari Neeyum, it should be this thing, whatever it's called, I guess Vilasini rather than Kedaram, right? Now, is the scale close to Kedaram? Yes, of course, definitely it's close to Kedaram, right? But it is not Kedaram, right? If you take a song like, let's say, Om Namaha from Geetanjali or Idayate Tirudade, now there it's okay to say that it's based on Hamsanadam for the most part, but there's a slight deviation in the Charanam where you have that lower da coming in, right? Om Namah ra 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 ra. And then in the Charanam towards the end, there's a line that goes very beautiful symmetry, by the way, right? It's symmetry between that and the starting of the Pallavi. But there you have the lower da coming in, and of course, it's very obvious that that deviates from Hamsanadam. But because since much of the rest of the song sticks to the Hamsanadam scale, it's fair enough to say that the song is largely based on Hamsanadam, but with a small deviation. But here, with Sundari Neeyum, I don't think it's right to say that, because it lacks some very defining key features of Kedaram, right? So for the very same reasons, I don't think Idhu or Malai is Kedaram either. That's another claim I hear thrown around quite a bit. So it's again, it's very scalar in its treatment, and the claim that Ennavale is Kedaram is the most amusing of all to me. I wouldn't attribute any raga to this song at all. Now, next in complexity, according to me, going back to our spectrum of scalar to non-scalar, come ragas like Reetigowla and Natakuranji. These are some very interesting ragas, because I think here there is so much information already packed into the scale, right? So for instance, Reetigowla, saga ri ga ma ni da ma ni ni sa sa ni da ma ga ma pa ma ga ri sa, right? So there's so much nuance and complexity already pre-packaged into the Aronam Avaronam. So the Aronam Avaronam does a lot of heavy lifting for you, right? So, and I believe these ragas came first, and then the scales were kind of retrofitted, right? So, because the Aronam Avaronam is so replete, with information, I think it's not very surprising that many film songs stick quite closely to the scale of Reetigowla, right? Because you don't have, there isn't a lot of interpretation that you need to do going beyond the scale, because the scale itself offers so much information about the raga, right? So that's why I think Azhagana Rakshasiye, Kangal Irandal, of course going way back, Chinna Kannana Azhaikiran. I think it's fairly okay to say that these are somewhat based on Reetigowla. Of course, there are deviations. I think, in fact, Azhagana Rakshasiye and Chinna Kannana Azhaikiran, especially in the beginning of the Charanams, they deviate quite a bit. For instance, Azhagana Rakshasiye, all that doesn't exist in Reetigowla. Same way in Chinna Kannan, all that is not Reetigowla, right? But interestingly, Kangal Irandal sticks way more closely to the Reetigowla scale in its entirety. But what is common to all three songs is that they lack one very defining phrase of Reetigowla, which is Nida pada nida ma pada riga nida pada nida ma. That phrase, I to the best of my memory and to the best of my hearing, I don't find that in any of these songs. But setting that aside, I think it's not that egregious or ridiculous to say that these songs are based on Reetigowla. And I have a whole other video on Natakurunji that I've made before, so I won't repeat myself. The song I spoke about there was Kanna Muchi a few years ago, so I'll add a link to that in the description if and you can watch it if you're interested. Anyway, now moving along the spectrum, finally let's get to the kings or queens of Carnatic music, ragas like Shankarabharanam, Thodi, Kalyani. Now interestingly, although these have a linear aronam and avaronam, there is no zigzag or vakram or anything. Sarigama padanisa, sanidapama garisa in all three cases. Despite that, these ragas go so much beyond their respective scales, right, that it's just impossible to capture the raga in all its glory by just singing the aronam avaronam. So for instance, na 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 so if you just sing Sarigama Padanisa Sanidapama Garisa, you're missing out on all this rich phrases and gamakas, right? And I think, in my opinion, Shankarabharanam and Thodi are even more transcendent of their scales compared to Kalyani, in my opinion, right? So, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's my idiosyncratic view, but somehow with Kalyani, I think it's relatively a little bit more okay to claim that certain film songs are based on Kalyani, even though I do have very strong reservations. Like for instance, is Sundari Kannal based on Kalyani? I'm not so sure I would be completely on board with that claim, because it lacks so much, pretty much all of the nuances of the Kalyani raga in the Carnatic tradition. But I think compared to Thodi and Shankarabharanam, I think the proximity between the Kalyani scale and the Kalyani raga is maybe a tad more, and I have to reason this out with myself a little more. I don't know why I feel like that. But with Shankarabharanam and Thodi, the raga and the scale, the bare bone scale, are just so vastly different. So that's why I think to make a claim like Puducherry Kacheri from Singaravelan, or any of the hundreds of major scale based songs in film music, to say that they are Shankarabharanam, I think it's completely off the mark, because the major scale Sarigama Padanisa Sanidapama Garisa is, I just find it to be entirely different from Sarigama Magari Sani Sari Sara Gama Padani Sani Dapa Magari Sani Sari Gama. So the scale of Shankarabharanam with all its, the raga Shankarabharanam with all its splendor just sounds completely different from the bare bones structure, just the scale of Shankarabharanam, you know, to my ears. Same with Thodi, of course. Thodi is, I think, one of the most extreme cases. So we have to be really careful when attributing film songs to Thodi. So, you know, when I read somewhere, maybe Wikipedia, that Usure Pogade from Ravanan was based on Thodi, you know, I couldn't help but chuckle. So before I wrap up, just a quick note about Hindustani Ragas. To the best of my knowledge, you know, Hindustani music is not as hung up or hardcore about prayogas or, you know, phraseologies or, you know, gamakas as Carnatic music is. I mean, they do of course have a lot of beautiful memes and, you know, their own types of gamakas, but one key differentiator is that they lack our trademark kampitam, the kampita gamakam, or the oscillation, the heavy oscillation. Sari ga ma, like in Thodi, the ga, right? So Hindustani music doesn't have that at all, I think. And even with scales of ragas, they take a lot more liberty. So it's much less problematic, I think, to associate Hindi film songs or film songs in general to Hindustani ragas compared to Carnatic ragas, right? Of course, I'm sure there are exceptions to this as well, but I think by and large, I think that's true. So I'll end my rant or rambling there. My main point is certainly not that, you know, we have to sit and agonize over, you know, every film song to very carefully identify what raga it is in or what raga it's not in. To the contrary, in fact, you know, my point is that sometimes, or, you know, often, it's best not to worry about the raga of film songs at all and just sit back and enjoy it. So I hope there was something you were able to take away from this video. Let me know what you thought in the comments. So until next time, take care and thank you for watching.